Wow, great. Wow, thank you very much. Thank you very much. How is everyone doing? Okay, I see. You're a little bit tired. I ask again, and I want to see just like, how is everyone doing? Hi, that's what I wanted to hear. Thank you very much for coming. Crack the code of high-performance teams. My name is Sven. I work for Atlassian as a DevOps advocate, and I'm doing this for a living. And who's here actually working in a high-performance team? Hands up. 1, 2, 3. Ah, quite some. What are you doing here, right? Right. What do you want to learn? Okay, yeah. Probably you want to reassure that that you are actually doing everything right to work in a high-performance team, right? So the question is, what is the code, right? What is the code of a high-performance team, right? How do we crack the code? So first things, just like let's start out to crack the code of a high-performance team. So what would be just like the code look like? And let's try something here. Numbers, right? So we try to just like high-performance teams know their numbers. They know where they're good at, they know where they're not good at, they just like know their numbers. So as a high-performance engineering team, what would your numbers actually look like, right? So let's see if that cracks the code of a high-performance teams. Well, so if you're just like an engineering team, your numbers could be just like lines of code, right? Just like put out more lines of code. Does that make you a high-performance team? No, we know just like the answer is no, right? I can add a lot of lines of code. That doesn't make sense. Doesn't put in, right? Okay, maybe, but let's try something else with numbers, right? What else can we measure, right? How about story points, right? Story points, yeah, we measure everything in story points. Except story points are actually more for estimations, right? So they don't measure if I'm a high-performance team just because I put on more story points. I can just like say, hey, this is just like high story point story, right? And that doesn't say anything. It just can take a short time to implement that story. So story points are probably also not a good measurements, but hey, we have more numbers. You heard about probably during this day, during yesterday, about the DORA metrics, right? Change failure rate or deployment frequency, all good numbers. But does that make you really a high-performance team? Let's see. Do we crack the code with numbers? No. Let's try something else. AOI. Does that crack? First, what is that, right? No idea. But we try things like to crack the code. So does that crack the code? Let's see. Boom! It cracks the code. But you are just like know much about how to crack the code for high-performance team as before, right? What does that mean, AAOI? So let's take a look, right? So high-performance teams actually have alignment. So they aligned inside the team. They know what they're doing. They align. They work towards a bigger goal. So this is just like what high-performance teams are doing. Second thing is autonomy. So these teams can run autonomously without dependencies from other teams or with less dependencies, or actually they cut down the dependencies to other teams. So autonomy is a big thing for high-performance teams. Outcome. They concentrate on the outcome, not the outputs. So everything that we saw on the numbers, just like that, were outputs, right? Lines of code, deployment frequency, this is outputs. These teams actually concentrate on the outcomes. So they are outcome-oriented. What value do I create for my customers? Okay, what's the last thing? Improve, yes, right? High-performance teams know how to improve, right? They know how to improve their ways of working, how they work, what they are doing. All right, we will go through each of these things and talk about just like what does it mean. And I've brought in tons of examples from Atlassian teams, how they just like change to high-performance teams, or how they change and make these 4 things better for themselves. And the first thing, of course, I want to talk about how the team is actually built alignment in itself. So we're talking about engineering teams. So the first thing that comes to my mind was a development team. I'm a DevOps advocate. It's code, of course, right? And the team needs to align around the code, right? They need to all write good code. But often what I see in teams is they have this question, what does good code look like, right? Can you answer that for your team? What is good code? Otherwise, you have a lot of discussions and you're not aligned on at all, right? So actually, the Bitbucket team actually said, okay, let's define that. What is good code? And they come up with a couple of things, like their Python coding guidelines. Yeah, Bitbucket Cloud is developed in Python. So they came up with a lot of things, just like coding guidelines that they have, just like class names or camel case, don't use line continuations, all those things. You can argue around, is that something that is really useful or not? But what they actually achieve with their coding guidelines is that also the code is readable, right? So they just like their eyes got trained to the same code. They know their rules. You can test these things. You don't need to just like do code reviews for a lot of these things, right? You can just like do that with static code analyzers, change the code, so all great. So less confusion around how does the code look like, what is good code, less confusion, and actually more alignment. So I told you just like, you can check these things automatically, right? You don't need to just like do a code review. But there was also a thing on that called single responsibility principle. You probably have heard before about that, right? No, not a tool can check that at the moment. Let's say what AI can do. So we need to just like also to just like spread the learnings inside the team and align around the code. We need to do code reviews, right? And you're doing code reviews, right? Yeah? Okay, great. Just to be sure that we are aligned here. Code reviews are super important, just like also, as I said, to spread the learning inside the team. Now, there's a thing with code reviews, and it's not too easy, and people are just like holding back also on code reviews. There's the human side of code reviews, right? And people tend to not like code reviews very, very much. And I show you how. So this might be an example of I've added these lines of code here, right? Let's assume that it's a nice while loop, nothing really fancy, right? So I added these lines of code. And then I put a pull request out there and asked my coworkers, right, what do you think about the code? And the first answer that I get is this here. What the fuck, Sven? Oh, God. What's happening? Okay, I'm a polite person. And I said, okay, breathe in, breathe out. Okay, what do you mean by that? What do you mean, right? And then the next comment is just like, oh, this code is ugly. I said, oh, God. I'm done with this code review, I don't want to do code reviews anymore. But as I said, I'm a polite person, and I'm carrying on, and I just like ask, okay, tell me more about it, right? Why do you think this code is ugly? And then the comment is just like, it would have been nicer if you've used a for loop. Yeah, but nicer, right? What does that mean, just nicer? So just an advice, if you're doing code reviews and you're the reviewer, don't be like that person, right? Or with other words, don't be just like a jerk if you do code, right? That's just like one big advice beforehand. So who actually has been bullied by a jerk, let's say in the last month? No, don't raise your hands. I know your coworkers are in the room. It's fine, all good. So, oh, I see there some conflicts. All right. Anyway, what I want to say is just like, but these reviewers are actually why people don't like code reviews, right? So that's actually the reason why people say, I don't want to put my code out there to all my coworkers, to all others that need to review my code. It's my code, right? So actually the Jira team was facing exactly this. So they were looking, but they were taking a step back and saying, excuse me, they were saying just like, okay, let's take a look at it. We have this thing, a reviewer, and they are in this protected bubble, right? On the other side, you have actually the author, and they are opening themselves up. They just like open and for feedback, right? Wild feedback from all your coworkers. So let's just like protect them a little bit, the authors, right? Let's protect them so they get not but bullied by some coworkers. So let's put in some rules. So they said, okay, we write down our first rule is just like assume competence, right? Everyone in the Jira team got hired for a reason. We're doing a lot of interviews, coding tests, all these things. So we actually assume that these are good programmers that we hire, right? So assume competence is the first thing that they came up with, right? And say, okay, we assume competence. Then they say, hey, be constructive in your feedback. This code looks ugly, is not constructive feedback. I can't do anything with that, right? I don't know what this is all about. So just like be sure that your feedback is constructive, right? And then they also said just like, oh, we need to explain the reasoning. We need to explain the reasoning. Why do you think like a for loop would be nicer? Like explain that to me. So I want to learn too. It's important for me to learn it, right? So they wrote down a bunch of more rules for their code review process, right? So they called it pull request submission and review etiquette, and they put it on a Confluence page. And every time someone is actually violating these rules, you can call it out, right? It's still not fine to do that, but people learn along the way, right? So you can call this out. So this is just like super important. So this actually means, right? It is less bullying and more alignment. All right. So now that we aligned the team around code, right? We need to just like move on to the organization, and we want to just like build more independent teams, right? Team needs to move forward independently. And it could be actually seen as this. If we work in a small startup, this might be okay, right? It's a lot of chaos. You talk to each other. You're just like, there's no rules at all. This is chaotic, and it's fine maybe for a small startup, but once you grow, it's not going to be fine, right? You want to just like have some more structure in how you want to work together as teams, right? So you add some rules, some processes, right? Some policies, all those things. Great. So you know how work flows, right? You define that through your policies. But then these things are happening, right? Oh, you can just like do it next week. Well, we need approval for that, but the person that actually approves these things is actually out, so you have to wait 2 weeks. And there's a lot of wait time, right? So processes are getting actually in the way of getting stuff done for the team. The solution, as I already said, is just like we're building more autonomy into the team, so more autonomous teams. So it looks like this. But autonomous teams are great, but you don't want to let them run in all kinds of directions. That's also not good. That might end up in a little bit chaotic fashion, right? So you just like want to align those autonomous teams. But it's not just about alignment. Let's talk a little bit about how do we build actually autonomous teams? How can we make our teams more autonomous? So we can do that actually by adding more people to the team, right? So if we need a designer, it's on the team. If we need a developer, yeah, they should be on the team anyway. If we need a QA person on the team, we just like grab the person whenever we need them. And the ops people are all on the team, product manager. This list can go on and on, right? So this is actually not working out. The team gets broad, and the Trello team ran actually in some problems with that. Because if you look at it, look at our ratio from QA people to developers, for example. It's 1 to 30, right? So we have 1 QA person and 30 developers. That doesn't scale if you put a QA person on every team. That doesn't really work. But we want to build autonomy. So we want to make the team autonomous. And if we just like have to call in a QA person every time the test the code needs to be tested, then it would just like stop the team from moving on. But we want to move forward independently. So the Trello team looked at it and said, okay, well, the devs are already doing automated testing. All right, so they just like do that. And the QA was doing exploratory tests, which is just like manual testing. So they do have this test plans where they click through. So that's what they're doing, right? And that's a problem because the QA people are doing this work. So what they said is just like, okay, let's give that all to the developers. Sounds crazy, right? that develop this test, right? And they call themselves quality assistants, not quality assurance, but quality assistants. So they are there actually to help the developers to become better testers. But they don't want to get in the way. They want to just like help that the team moves forward independently. So one example what they actually did and how they did it is QA kickoffs. So a QA kickoff is basically a ritual that you just like do. You pull in the QA person before actually you start developing code. So the developer and the QA person are sitting together and saying, okay, how would we test this feature? We're looking at the user story. How would we test this feature once it's written? So they sit together, they write down the test plan. The developer learns a bunch of things by just like, oh, you should look at this, you should look at that to build the test plan. And then the developer just like goes independently, develops a feature, tests it accordingly to the test plan, also writing automated tests, right? And then moves on, just like and can deploy the feature without the QA involved anymore. The QA was involved already, right? Just like have written the test plan. That's great. So the QA people are not getting in the way anymore to get things deployed. We're doing a thing called demo. I will explain what that is. That is a little bit of a safety net for the QA people to just like look at it. I will just like in 15 minutes just like talk more about that. But what it means for developers is actually less wait time and more independence. And we want to make our software developers independent as possible by having teams to support them, right? So they can just like run as fast as they can, and we have teams to support them, just like the QA team. And we want to have then actually, we give them all the same starting points, right? That's the same starting things to start with, right? They have the same tools, they have the same team sizes, all the things. But what we notice actually, there are teams out there that are faster than others, right? That's what we notice, right? Teams run at different speed. It's fine, right? They also work maybe on different things, so how can you measure speed? But what we notice is just like some teams are better than others are just like dealing with that. So we said, okay, let's just like take on our lab code and just like look at this team, just like look at directly what are these teams doing. Find those things, right? And we were looking at it. And some teams were doing stand-ups. Maybe that is a thing that high-performance teams are doing or speedy teams are doing. But other teams were not doing stand-ups. So maybe this is a thing. I don't know. And then some teams know exactly what the customer journey looked like. So they had it all laid out, the customer journey. They know what the customer was doing and all those things, right? Other teams didn't. But we saw some patterns when we were looking closer at what these teams are doing. And we wanted to give those patterns to all kinds of teams. So we saw these practices. These teams were doing different practices than other teams. So we just like said, okay, how can we get those practices that these high-performance teams are doing to the other teams? So what we did is actually we wrote them down. So we just like interviewed those teams and wrote them down, compared how teams were doing them, and we wrote down their good practices that made them high performance. And we collected all those practices in a so-called team playbook. So this is a playbook actually that we can give to all teams, right? It's guiding the other teams. So this team playbook guides other teams to help them to move forward fast. So they actually need to assess where they need help, and then they can go to the team playbook and say, okay, what are good practice? We don't know the customer very well, how they move through our features. So we can do a customer journey. This is what they did, right? And so these are good practices in a team playbook that you can just like take out, and we don't just like dominate, and we don't just like say it's not a process that we put on top of everything that everyone needs to do a daily stand-up. No, it's the team decides. That's like what's best for the team. And here are some guidance what we think like are good practices for high-performance teams. So You might have heard of it, but we actually thought, okay, give that to the public, and the team playbook is available. It's for free. It's a free resource. You can just like use it yourself. There are 50 different plays in the team playbook. Give it to your teams and let them try out whatever they need at Atlassian.com/team-playbook and try them out. So it means less processes for our teams, right? And more independence because they can pick whatever they need, actually. All right. Let's talk about creating value for the customers, right? We want to create value for the customers, and high-performance teams know how to create value for the customers. They concentrate on the outcome, right? So who's defining to creating value for customers? It's, at Atlassian at least, it's the product people, right? The product people are defining the value for the customers. They're doing a lot of research, yada, yada, yada. And then they just like hand it over to the developers who are creating the software. So true story here, my story with a product manager, just like going back and forth, and we were not taught at, I didn't understand actually what they wanted to create and what's the value that I wanted that I should create for the customer. So I got this user story here. As a user, I want to export data so I can have it in an Excel file. I said, easy done, right? Easy done. Give me just like a few hours. I can do that. A button here or a menu item. Take a library, just like export the user data, copy that over, and export that to an Excel file. Great, done, right? But then this person came back to me and said, oh, we tried it out, the product manager, and said, you know, there's so much data in it. We just want the important data. I said, oh, okay. Great, okay. So the user story, as a user, I want to export the important data so I can have it in an Excel file. Great, doing that, right? I wrote that just like just like a subset of the data. Done, boop, gave it to the product manager. Product manager came back, oh, it's an Excel file. I didn't know it. I want a CSV file now because I didn't know that there's a difference between Excel and CSV. I said, okay, great. Doing it again, frustrating moment, and then as a user I want to export the important data so I can have it in a CSV file. Great, so did that, and then they came back to me and said, brilliant, Sven, it's working. I can now export the user data, right, in a CSV file and import that back into our CRM system. And that was really the frustrating moment where I said, our CRM system has an API, so I could have just shuffled the data over easily through the API. And that's a reason why we should talk about the value that we want to create and talk more about, don't just like communicate through user stories. So the problem is that the product people, they're really good, right? I don't want to blame them. They're good at research, measurement, interviews. But the problem is we squeeze that into a little small user story, and then we just like build this whole running software, right? That's a problem. So the Jira team actually said, okay, we don't want to work this way. We just like want to have product people and developers happy together, right? So the developers understand actually what they built, right? Why they need to build it, and the product people can have early insights before we deploy anything to production and see how the software looks like. So we were just like taking a step back and saying, okay, the developers are highly concentrated on the make phase, right? The creating stuff, right? We are creating software as developers, where the product people are taking more time on just like thinking about the problem phase. Now, these are not all phases that we defined. We also saw there's a solution phase, right? So once we identify the problem, there are probably more solutions to just like solve that problem. So we're talking about these, right? The explore phase. And don't forget to have the impact phase also. Super important. I see a lot of teams just like throwing things into production and then say, oh, we're done, right? You are not. You need to measure just like how's the impact and just maybe make adjustments. You need to make your features better over time. All right, so said that is we don't want developers to spend all their time on all phases, right? There's a lot of things that developers do already, right? So we defined actually that, okay, a little bit of the problem phase to understand the problem better, but then we are spending most time on the create phase, where actually product people probably spend more time here at the problem phase and then spend less time at the create phase, but they need to be involved, right? So we define different rituals that we have on those phases. For example, we're doing a project kickoff. That's a kickoff that we invite everyone, designers, ops people, Q&A people, QA people, everyone, just like to just like understand why we are building this feature. What's what the customer wants, right? We have prototypes, right? We build prototypes, and not just Figma prototypes, but also just like we need to see if it's technically feasible, so the developers are involved in that. During development, we're doing regular demos. We demo a software, and everyone gets involved. Everyone needs to look at it, right? And see if we're building the right thing, so we can catch things early. And then also we're doing goal signals measure, where we just like look at the usage of our features, and then come back and say, okay, we need to improve it here and there. Now, this is high-performance engineering team, so let's talk a little bit about the demos, right? They are not done in person anymore at Atlassian. We are doing them through Zoom. We're a team anywhere, so we're remote. A lot of people are remote. But the demo session is first open. Everyone can join. Everyone can join. I can join every the Jira Teams demo, no problem, right? So everyone can join the demo session. They are recorded. I can watch them. So they are open. That's the first thing, and that's super important. They are outcome-oriented. So we show customer value, not implementation details. We don't want to bore everyone to hell, right? So we show actually customer value. So the product people can just like say, that might be not what we thought you should build, right? I know we defined it that way. Let's have a discussion. We challenge the solution, right? So they can actually take this thing that the developers built back to the customer, and the customer can just like say, I want that or want that not, right? So early in the process, we get early feedback on the process. And then also it's important to celebrate, right? We are all in one call, right? It's good to celebrate together. If we just like deploy a feature to a small subset of users and they love it, just like sit together in one session and celebrate that we did it. So it means for us less rework, because we're finding things early in the process, and we're creating also more value, better value for the customer. Right, all right, let's talk about the last thing what high-performance teams do. They continuously improve. They don't stand still. They continuously improve. And you have heard a lot of talks about developer experience. So if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Peter Drucker said that. So what do we measure? We talked a lot about it during Unleash here. DORA metrics are probably a good start when you just like don't know where to start. But the thing is, that's a good start, right? But deployment frequency for mobile teams doesn't make sense, right? You don't want to deploy every 2 hours or so to the App Store. That's not a thing, right? So you need to just like see what are the pain points for your team, right? What is really important for your team, right? And take those measurements and put those measurements actually into Compass and just like build your scorecards, right? And Compass is a great thing because it's not just like taking your measurements and showing you how successful you are or how unsuccessful you are, I don't know. But it also shows you some baselines, right? So you apply baselines to it. So if you see just like it's getting yellow, if it's red, we need to do something. So it's all about this, right? So it shows you just like, there's something wrong with this measurements, with the signal that we have, right? But the problem also with Compass then is, right, I call it the wallboard problem. I don't know. Back in the days when we were all sitting in one office, we had these TVs out there, and then we have everything is all built on that, which is great. But I've been in so many offices that use that, that all builds were red, or all tests were red, right? But the software was still all right, so people were actually ignoring it, right? They didn't look at the wallboard anymore. This can also happen if you just like have your data in Compass. Plus, it is important to talk about it. And I don't know if you heard about it, we're running a checkups ritual. That's a weekly ritual that we run, where we actually look at the metrics that we're measuring and saying, oh, deployment frequency went down. But you know what? That's not a problem, because we know we just like worked on a very complicated part of the system, right? We didn't deploy anything, but we know why. It's not a problem, really. It's not really a problem. So we can't ignore that for a week or two, right? Once we are back, we need to just like improve it or just like see if the number goes up again. But we don't need to worry now, right? So you've seen that checkups built into Compass itself, so you can just like add what went well, so you can have all your Compass checkups retrospective in Compass, and also you can write down what actions you wanna take on that. But so here's the thing: measurements are great, right? And measuring things shows you probably some signals, right? A little bit here, a little bit there, right? Some lamps go on, some lamps go off, right? But some people try to treat software development like a production line. Optimize this little thing, like the idea phase must be faster, or the deploy phase must be shorter, right? We need to just like optimize the hell out of it. We are just like working like in a factory, like Frederick Winslow Taylor did back in the past, right? Don't do that, right? And it's not true. Software development is not a production line, right? We don't produce the same piece of software over and over again. Right, like we're producing cars, right? If we're producing cars, that might still be true. But for software developers, work has changed. It's a creative job. So we need to just like, we're building things that no one has built before, right? So we can't really treat it as a production line. So why do we measure at all, right? So here's the thing: measure what's important, but don't make important what you can measure, right? You might also heard that a good practice is not only just like measuring things, which shows you signals, and you need to talk about it in checkups, but also to asking your developers what's going on, right? So we are internally running developer surveys, right? We're running monthly developer surveys, and we are asking questions. We don't just like say, hey, what bothers you with software development in your process? We're just like saying, okay, are you satisfied actually with your speed to ship quality code, right? This is one thing that we ask, right? Then we're asking also, are you satisfied with the wait time? Are you waiting for builds too long? Are you waiting for other teams, right? Are you satisfied with the wait time that you have? Are you satisfied with your execution independence, right? Autonomy. Do you depend too much on other teams? Does that take too much time for you? Are you satisfied with your access to tools, processes, and practices? Is that something that you like or that you don't like, right? Do you have the right tools at hand, the right practices at hand to get your job done? How about your effort of managing external standards like security and governance? Is that put on you, right? Are you satisfied with that? How about managing your code, your infrastructure, your pipeline, everything that has not to do with your production code that is actually running in production, the features that you're doing, right? Managing this infrastructure. What about the ramp-up time to just like get new developers on your team? How long does it take? Are you satisfied with it? And then what is your developer satisfaction overall? So we are asking these things, and we are asking team, are you satisfied with it? But we have so many engineers and so many teams, so for every team it might be different. So we're also asking, how important is that for your team, right? How important is the ramp-up time might not be important for every team. If you don't onboard new developers all the time, you can ignore the ramp-up time. So out of these two scores here that we ask, right, we calculate in a so-called opportunity score. And in the opportunity score, we have a traffic light system. We applied a traffic light system to it. So you can really see developer satisfaction seems to be okay. If you're just like in this Y corridor, right, it's okay. If you're falling below, it's getting yellow. But if you're just like beneath here, right, seems to high importance, low satisfaction, you need to do something and tackle these things first, right? These things are important to be tackled. The developers are not happy about it. So what about measurements and survey results? So important is also take those and give those to the teams, right? And give the teams time actually to work on the issues that you got out of that. It's very important that your developers see the survey results so they can fix things, right? Don't just like hide it with them. It's also important that you give it to them so they will do the survey again so they see getting value out of the survey, right? So give them also time to improve. Continuously improvement is important thing for high performance teams, right? So do that. All right. So we just like talked about 4 things for high performance teams. Alignment, align those teams around the code. The team needs to be aligned around goals, everything. Make a team, try to make them autonomously as possible, run them independently, right? Give them support, but try to just like cut down the dependencies on teams so they can go full speed. Outcome oriented. They need to just like rather gather around the customer value, measure the customer value, and work closer to your product people, to the product people that define the customer value, right? That work on that. Then so also your development team understand the why behind the features. And then also give them time and room to continuously improve. As I said, we're giving, for developer satisfaction, we're giving our developers 10% of their time to just like work on these things, right? To improve their developer satisfaction. Now, I showed you a couple of things here, like the tech ops and the DevX survey, QA kickoffs and demos. So we actually added these 2 things as plays in the team playbook with the examples from Atlassian here. So the DevX survey that you saw is now available in the Atlassian team playbook. You can try it out. You can run it yourself with whatever survey tool that you want, or run CheckOps. We have written down a recipe how you run those things. QA kickoff and demos are coming soon, so we also write down these practices so you can use them for your organization, right? And they are available on atlassian.com/team-playbook, among with a lot of other plays, right, that helps your team to be a high-performance team. And with that, I want to thank you very much for your attention and enjoy the rest of Unleash. Thank you.